Are your people working hard but not reaching their full potential? The problem is not effort, it is development. At the Modern Observer Group, we transform workforce development into real performance. Our human-centered achievement programs help your team think better, communicate stronger, and execute at a higher level. That means higher employee engagement, stronger leadership, and measurable results across your organization. If you want a workforce that performs, leads, and delivers, it is time to invest in your people. Visit modernobserver.com and discover how the Modern Observer Group helps you build a workforce that wins.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Correll, and I'm here with my dear friend, Jan Jeremias. Jan, it seems kind of disingenuous just to call you a friend. You are so much more than that.
Thank you, Bill.
In my life, you're part of my existence system. Let's put it that way.
Oh, thanks, Bill. I appreciate that. And
Well,
appreciate
folks, yeah. So let's spend a moment properly appreciating each other. Just this one time, just as best we can. I don't remember what it was like before you were in my life. You're at that level with me, okay? That's kind of like, with my kids. I don't know what it was like before we had them. Or my beautiful wife. I don't remember who I was or what I was like before that. And with you, there have been so many great things that have happened to us, at us, for us in the last, I don't know, what do you think? We've been kicking around for maybe 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's amazing. But I also want to just say that the neat part of you and me is we're not in each other's business all the time. We are when we need to be. We are when we're requested, and we constantly are volunteering, to be available and to be of use to the other person. And I think that's kind of a special way to treat other people. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here for a minute. It's a beautiful day. I mean, temperature wise over here, I want to say we're probably somewhere around 62, 63 degrees, it seems, as opposed to the last couple of weeks, we've had 80s and 90s. Suitably 70s are a lot of fun. June 1st. I'm really kind of struggling with the whole notion of, I remember driving to Florida the first or second, actually the second. I was here for for New Year's Day, and then the second day I hopped in the car and headed down. But beyond that, most of the rest of this year is a blur. And I don't really think of it in terms of like having a value of either being good or bad. It has just been a blur. And there have been all sorts of ups and all sorts of downs. And I want to just say that thanks to the people around me, my downs have not been, they really haven't been, worth reporting or talking about. And I know you know what I mean by that, Jan.
Mm-hmm.
The please go ahead. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I do know what you mean. And I think that, I think even when, you just have days, some days, even when there's nothing going on, where you just get up and you're like, I don't know, you feel off, or you feel like, I don't know, maybe you're down or whatever it is. And just one is being able to reach out to people when you feel like that, like we talk about at the end. And sometimes it's just knowing that you could reach out to people, even if you don't feel the need at that, like, you don't want to at that moment, like, if you really you're like but I do have people to reach out to if I need to,
Yeah.
and I think that that's a huge I don't wanna say even advantage, gift, um, and then so yesterday I was feeling kinda down, and I sat there and I was, like, reflecting on, like, what was it? Like, why was I there and what did I feel? And part of it was the fact that I was really tired, so that never helps me feel like, I'm tired. I think of it as being a baby, I get crabby, like, I'm just like but some of it and I just started to think about, you know, well, this and this isn't working, but this and this is working and just started to reflect on the things that are working and not that I was ignoring the things that aren't working, but I just needed to, soften that part, like that dynamic. And we opened up talking about going to the edge, like just kind of like, okay, I'm not denying that's there, but I also have to keep space for the fact that it's not absolute. Like not everything in my life is bad, and not everything in your life is going to be hunky dory. Great word, hunky dory, or
Yeah.
two words. but 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 it's going to be both.
Yeah. I think a thrownness when something is unexpected. The things that I like to call breakdowns, and that's when there's an unmet expectation, a breach of an agreement, or a failure of something to actually be what was intended. And being a breakdown is something that can be altered and fixed and upgraded. Um, that kind of like puts it into a mechanical language domain separate from, but still carries along with it some of the flavors and smells of it being a bad thing. If something's just bad, there's not much to grab onto. But if it's a breakdown, you can start asking your question: what is the unmet expectation? What was I hoping for that didn't happen? Is that something that can never happen now, or is it something that I just need to take a little different shot at it than I did before? So it puts it into an area where the natural curiosity and inquisitiveness that we talk about a lot can actually come into play. And for example, um, Friday, I was supposed to go to physical therapy first thing in the morning. And unfortunately, I didn't get the message that we were going to be having our crew show up and replacing the lead main pipe that we've gotten water through probably since the 1890s. That's when they put the original system in. Lead was pretty pliable, easy to work with, and so a lot of pipes, back in those days, they didn't really understand that lead was bad for your body, in that period of time. And in fact, through antiquities, people made drinking things and they made their plates and stuff out of lead. So uh, long story short, uh, night before, Jan says, okay, so it's confirmed the guys are showing up tomorrow, probably somewhere around 8. And I said, guys, and she said, yeah, they're going to replace the water main. I said, oh, okay. So I had to leave a message for my physical therapist, who's one of the neatest people on the face of the planet. And I was so disappointed because I haven't seen her for almost 2.5 weeks, going back before I had my surgical procedure. And I was really looking forward to seeing her. So the breakdown was, it's probably time for somebody to look what I'm doing with my exercises on a daily basis. Help me understand the different testing that I've been doing as a lay person, trying to understand what my true capacities are and whether or not I'm going to get back uh, to where I thought I was, before I had a fall down in Florida. And the other thing is she gives a damn good hug. She's not very tall, but she's a, she's just a warm human being, and she's very open, and the two of us kind of feel the same way about exchanging energy. So the worst part of it was all that. The best part of it was I looked at my calendar, and guess what happens tomorrow at 2 p.m.? I get to see her again. Now, staying in line with all of that thinking, and also kind of acknowledging her for being one of the people who has helped me both physically and sanity wise get through the last 2, 3 months. Tomorrow may be the last time that I actually end up spending time with her, with for physical therapy for at least the next few weeks. What I mean by that is that we are kind of approaching to where exercises are not going to be much more of a solution than they have been already. I think it's kind of the nature of soft tissue injuries that when they occur, they're usually going to be about as good as they're going to get maybe 2, 3, 4 months later. And I'm at 4 months. So I've got another, believe it or not, I have never, this is more CAT scans or MRIs than I've ever had in my entire life in a 2-month period. I've got an MRI coming up 2 weeks from now. And that one is going to tell my ortho doctor, is there something mechanically that can be done to relieve some of the nerve pressure, in my sacrum, and allow my knee, to be able to go back and develop its own way of being, because they're kind of linked together? Or is this as good as it gets? And I told you all that. It's a long story. And I don't remember which Sesame Street character used to call them boring stories. But the point is that by the time I get through all of this doctoring and mechanical looking into my body and trying to understand physiologically what the next step for me might or might not be, I have a lot of time to sit and think, a lot of time to be appreciative. And that's the real blessing of all of this, is that I have things to look forward to, but I also have an amazing present. I have a present that so many good people show up in almost every single day. And the neat part of the best people is they're always reaching out to me and asking me if I have enough. Bill, do you have enough? And then fill in the blank. And you're at the top of that list, which is why I kind of went off on a tangent for a while, but
Yeah.
you're very good to me.
Oh, thank you. But I think you bring up one of the things that, well, one of so a few things that you shared I loved. And one is with the long story. No, I'm kidding. With the long story is that you're willing to explore options. Like you're not, you're saying, okay, well, this has reached its capacity or how much it's going to do for me. Is there anything else out there that could offer me some relief?
Yeah.
And I love that because I think that people end up being told, and sometimes they're told by whoever, their health professionals, their family, whatever, like this is basically as good as it's going to get. And that is, and I think that sometimes one is our mindset to think, okay, is there something else I can do? So, second of all, is I think it's empowering when we do that, because otherwise we can feel very helpless. Like, our body is not within our control or whatever else it is that's happening in our life. And I think sometimes or most of the time we surprise ourselves and we realize that we can go a lot further. We can get back to where we were or close to. Sometimes we can't, and I'm not saying that that's absolutely always true, but I've had situations in my life where I'd have to, where I've sat there and, when even the doctor's amazed at, how far and how well whatever it was healed.
Yep.
And, and everybody has and then also it's very individual. and it's very unique. So it's, and I'm always like, I will do I've always said this, like, I'm open to everything. Like, I've gone for acupuncture, I've gone for something called vibrational healing, I've gone for myofascial work, I've gone for massage, I've done chiropractic. I mean, it was not like I ever put all my eggs in one basket and said, this was the solution to the be all end all solution for everything.
Right.
I was always like, there's room for, if it might help, I'm going to try it. And worst thing that can happen is it doesn't work. And as long as I haven't gone backwards, then it's okay. Just another thing that, you know, wasn't for me or wasn't my body, wasn't able to heal my body if it's a physical thing. But I think it's to be open to the possibility that it could help.
Yes.
Because if you're not open, nothing's going to help. I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter it doesn't matter what it is. Then nothing's going to help.
I think what's kind of neat also about that, Jan, is that I think different people have a different idea of what being open can mean and is what's available for them. And I think that one of the things that people who try to be open, and that word try is important in this sentence, is they're mostly not believing that there's going to be anything that's going to be um, of use going on, and they may just be going along for the ride and not being part of the responsibility for the outcome. And and what I've found, and what I also hear in you saying is that when the cool stuff happens and people predict what it's going to be like, and maybe we're not on the same sort of path for recovering and for pain levels and all the rest of that, and it seems extraordinary, or it seems like the head of the class sort of a deal, um where that doesn't mean anything. It's not like you know you're cool because you don't have as much pain as other people have reported. Each of us is different. So the whole notion of being open to things means, what if you and I have some areas in our life that we really know nothing about and have no expertise? And that's resting on the shoulders and standing on the shoulders of the fact that we have expertise in many areas where we can really authoritatively, contribute to other human beings through our knowledge. And then there are blind spots. There are things we've just never experienced before, or how we've experienced them has been contrary to what might be possible if we are open to experiencing them differently.
Yeah, and I think that we tend to be very, I mean, in general, I think it's human, like we tend to be very narrowly focused. So I'll use this example and I'll just say, okay, let's say I have a student right now, a yoga student who has tennis elbow. Okay. And she came to class last week and we were doing some stuff or whatever. And even she said, oh, I went to my acupuncturist and they said, it's really not my elbow, it's coming from my shoulder. And I think that we tend to be like, and it's common, like my elbow hurts or my knee hurts. And we look at it as being related. And yes, I'm not saying that the knee doesn't hurt or the elbow doesn't hurt, but most of the time it comes from someplace else. And I think if we can get curious enough and kind of like look at it as kind of like this intriguing kind of, I don't know, search or quest for something, like almost like a treasure hunt kind of thing, is like, with that kind of energy of curiosity, then you can sometimes decipher where it's coming from. And that becomes something that's very, in a lot of ways, is very individual. It's very unique to each person. And, and I think if we look at some of what like is happening in our lives that is not physical, like just in a situation or in a relationship or, is to just get the curiosity, like Gene, or that curiosity element turned on of like, okay, well, this conversation did not go as planned. or how I wanted it to, or I expected it to, however you fill in the blank. Where was I when I came into the conversation? Like, what was I thinking? Did I have this particular agenda or quote unquote in my mind?
Yeah.
What we talk about being open, like, was I open or did I have like a plan when I went in that I wanted this particular outcome? And I think sometimes being that objective and that open is hard because we do have an agenda and we do have a way we want things to go.
Yeah.
And I find the biggest lesson with that in my life lately is when I have conversations with my mother. Because I feel like and I get along great with my mother, but I have to remember, and I keep on reminding myself that it is her life, it is not my life, and that honoring who she is in that process of knowing and not, like, coddling to her necessarily, but being able to, like, see who she is and knowing her age, which my mother, let's say, God willing or whatever, will be 90 in October.
Right.
And just knowing and that's how she's been, and the fact that she's probably not gonna make any sort of drastic changes in who she is. She's not, making any drastic changes in who she is, you know, and she's a beautiful person, and just knowing that when I go into conversations about anything with her, and therefore just I don't know, it's kinda like every conversation, I just look at who she is. Like, who's standing before me? She's standing before me, you know? It's a lot better than if I come across with a particular, like, idea about something or a particular thing I think she should do, and most of the time, I can then broach what I think I might suggest, but if I read her where she is, then she's much more open to hearing it, as opposed to, like, just coming in and saying what I think and I feel and kind of ignoring the fact that she's standing there, or, like, not ignoring, but ignoring who she is, and then all of a sudden her guard goes up. And when her guard goes up, all of a sudden my guard goes up, and then it serves no purpose because nothing has been created from there.
So I'm hearing you, like, you meet her conversationally, and how do you go about determining where she is?
So, I mean, well, I think first of all, I talk to my mother every day, so there are a lot of at least once a day usually. So I have a lot of conversations with my mother.
Yep.
So I think I get on, and I think something that you share quite often, Bill, is I listen. It's like I sit there and uh, you know, I can tell by the sound of her voice. I know the cues to look for, of, you know, she's been out and and she lives in Florida and it's been 100 degrees and she's hot and and she's tired, like, not necessarily a good time to bring up some stuff sometimes when
Right.
she's not feeling, when she's as we talk and she cools down and she calms down, whatever's happening, then the conversation can flow or whatever. But it's kind of like I said, when I'm cranky, like, don't bring these certain things, you just don't bring up because I'm not in a space to receive them.
Right.
And I think that happens by listening.
Yeah, and the listening that I hear you talking about is full contact, all six senses,
That's right. It's
it all to bear and focus.
and yeah, it's like, it's like listening. And it's listening to like what we might call like somebody else might consider, but knowing my mother well enough and when like she's hot and she's tired and she is 90 almost. So it's the kind of thing where different things make her like if she, what makes her tired isn't what makes me tired being 30 years younger or more. It's
Right.
the kind of thing where it's like, oh, okay, like she went and she did a few things, which is huge for her and that kind of weather, and honoring the fact and being also, I think, of truly, like, I look at it and I think she looks at it. She was so cute when I saw her last and we were chatting and everything, and she said, it was kind of like just this, like, kind of little, she's like, I'm really proud of how well I've done since dad died. And haven't I done really well? And I said, no, you've done amazing. And she has. Like, I mean, I think she was really nervous about living on her own and being able to handle everything on her own once my father passed away. And she's like, "Yeah," and it was just so cute the way she said it. It was like, I've done a really good job at, like, these past, like, 4 years of being able to handle everything on my own, kind of thing, and I think I know that about her. It's like, I mean, I think if she says those few things, I mean, I don't think I expect more. It's not like I have this expectation of, like, "Oh my god, she's gonna, like, get up and, you know, do all these different things," or whatever. I mean, in Yiddish, you'd say "Knei Nahara," meaning like, you know, meaning like, thank goodness, like, it's an amazing thing that she's, like, able to do what she does.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But there is a deep listening, like you said, a very like, all the like, I'm very keyed into, like, okay, what words is she using? Like, how does her voice sound? Like, what are the words she's choosing, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you well enough to know you've got very special questions for your mom. And I know in some cases she has very special answers for some of your very special questions.
Yes, she does. Very
So
cute.
sometimes you have to move past that very special answer to get to the next one.
Right, exactly.
Remember that commercial in the 1960s when I think it was for baby aspirin or something like that. But the punchline is mothers are like that. Yeah, they are. If you've been fortunate enough to have an experience with a mother, then you know that for the most part their script isn't always going to be very shall we say apparent to you. And shifting from your mother to my mother, I used to have to, it was a little bit more like um an inquisition, than a question and answer period to nail her down. I mean, her way of being sometimes, and this was just like a persona that she put on somewhere along the way, was if there was a question that I asked that she didn't like, she just ignored it as if I had said nothing. Okay. I would say, Mom, I just asked you a question. She said, I heard your question and I'm not going to respond to it.
Selective hearing, yes.
Yes. Yeah. So once I understood how we were playing the game, that changed things up and gave me a fighting chance.
Right. My grandmother used to like you'd call her and you'd say to her, "How are you, Grandma?" And she'd say, "Oh, like better than I was yesterday." Well, yesterday, and then the next day she would call her and I would say, "How you doing?" "Oh, I'm better than I was yesterday." "Well, you said you were fine yesterday." So
That's
funny.
funny.
It was so
Well,
funny.
speaking of grandmothers, when I spoke to my grandmother, it was always something like, "Hey, Graham, how you doing?" And she said, "Oh, Billy, they tried to kill me, but they weren't successful." I don't know. Different. My God, different time capsules entirely. You stop and think about when would your grandmother have been born?
I think my grandmother, that was close, was born in 1902.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
My
somewhere,
grandmother, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
somewhere around then. Yeah.
Yeah, my grandfather was 10 years older than my grandmother, and my grandmother was born in 1903.
Wow.
So Thomas uh, Oscar Correll was born in 1893. And it was really something special, to really something special, to be around him because he was not careful. I mean, if you want to talk about a German hard ass, that's what he was. Our people got here in the mid 1800s, so I'm not talking about anything with the conflicts last century in Europe having anything to do with it, because I just think he was one of these people. He worked hard for a living with his hands. He became a supervisor at Chrysler, car company, and then he became shift superintendent of the second shift, at a plant. And he was capable of a very cutting sentence that would end your existence, or a very loving sentence that would make you feel like you were $1,000,000. And I think he kind of honed those skills by being all over the place. I mean, a big night for him, and I'll tell you this story, because when I first went to Detroit, my very first trip that I went, I was about a 1 year old, and I don't have any recollection of this, but he packed me up and he took me down to the corner bar to show me off, to Jackson and Shorty and Stinky, and the rest of the guys that he hung out with. He wanted to show them what Notre Dame's quarterback was going to look like in 1972. I don't have any recollection, but that was the story, and he couldn't have been prouder. I mean, he just plain couldn't have been prouder than to show up and show off his first grandson. There were other ways, I think I've told you stories about my grandfather and our trips to go around and buy things to make these memorable sandwiches. But like I said, he was the kind of guy that if somebody showed up drunk for the second shift, he'd put his arm around him and say, "Hey, buddy, we're going for a ride." And he'd drive him home. He said, "Sleep it off. Come in 4 hours early tomorrow. I'll pay you time and a half so you can make up the time you lost tonight. But you're not working with machinery." That's just the guy he was.
And you reminded me. Now I'm just thinking of my grandmother, who was like probably the kindest and never really had a negative word to say about anybody.
Yeah.
But just this feeling of, and I think everybody, I mean, I don't know anybody who didn't have that feeling around her. Like, just of everybody was welcome. Everybody was, um, yeah, everybody was welcome.
Yes.
She never had an ill word to say about anybody. Um, you know, at least outwardly, like maybe, after years or whatever, when we got older, maybe she would mention something about somebody. But in general, not a word ever.
Yeah.
Just such a nice, good person. And it's just so interesting when you have those people in your life that are like that. And I think sometimes you don't even realize the influence they had over you. And then all of a sudden something happens or a memory comes to mind, and when you're doing something or they remind, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like they had such a profound influence when they said that or they did that or the way they were." Or even through a story, even if you weren't there firsthand, just like the story of your grandfather. It's just like to hear that and you're like, "Oh." And I think it just teaches you, like we talked a few weeks ago, or like a month or so ago, about values. And I think that that's where you learn your values, is from
Yeah.
things like that. Like your grandfather obviously valued human beings, like valued other people, and also had a respect for them and an understanding, like, and that was, for the fact that this guy probably had a family. And he had one, he had gone out and had a good time, one too many or whatever reason. But he still had a family to support, and he still had to bring home a paycheck. And he understood that. I think we've lost that understanding in
Yeah.
a lot of cases. I, yeah, I think we have in certain circumstances.
I've always I've always been a sponge around older people, especially older men, uh, with where they were in life, what they were doing, how they were kind of getting in and out of scrapes and what they learned from it. I would always love hearing people talk about what I considered to be my list of things that I was working on, or what I used to call problems. And I think the really neat part of that was that it was as much of a Greek Socratic education as the Greeks had, back in the day, where they didn't study from books. They just recited, they listened, they toed the mark, they took what they learned and they explained how it was applicable or useful or not useful. And that was their way of demonstrating that they had facility with whatever the conversation was, or that it was useful to them in terms of either expanding their thinking, and that whole notion of having an open mind, which is so powerful. I mean, the early on in my 20s and 30s, when I first started becoming a supervisor of other people, um, I had this uh, little thing that I hung on the wall, and it basically said, and there was a picture of a guy, holding an umbrella, and it said, a mind like an umbrella or a parachute works best when it's open. But please be careful and know which one you're working with.
Mm.
And so that what that meant was, just by having an open mind, if you weren't using an appropriate or correct openness in the circumstances that you were in, you were not necessarily dealing with what you were going through right now and being present to it. We didn't call it being present to it. What we called it was playing heads up ball. Okay. And what that means is being ready for anything in the moment that you're doing what you're doing right now. But the first step is eyes up, awareness, look around, see what's going on, get as much information as you possibly can as quickly as you can.
One of the things you shared a few moments ago, Bill, that I absolutely, because it basically learning was through storytelling and the way you described it. I mean, I think the whole, like, Bible as we know it basically was oral history that they eventually wrote down,
Right.
or oral stories that they eventually recorded. And I think that learning through storytelling, one is that's, I think a lot more engaging and a lot more, you have the ability to grasp and remember it, I think, a lot better because you remember the story,
Yes.
and so I think that what you're sharing and what we've shared about like our grandparents, it was because, we listened to their stories. And so that's a huge part of it. And I think to myself, like, now what stories are people listening to? Are listening to the stories on the news, kind of thing, or for people they don't know or that they don't have contact with?
Right.
Are they listening to the people, or are there people in their lives they can listen to their stories? In an age where we're very technologically distracted, it's like what what content, almost like what content are we feeding ourselves? And what stories do we relay, us included? Like, what stories do we share with people or with
Right.
friends or with kids that we happen to become across with or whatever? It's like, what, because I do think we learn through stories. And I think that's really, it's like when you hear about someone, like someone from a particular era who passed away. It's like almost like to me, like there's this double kind of mourning or whatever. It's like, oh my gosh, I hope I remember their stories or I hope I missed out on hearing all their stories because now they're not here to share them. And there's like this feeling, and for me, it's always like, oh my gosh, you know, I hope I remember all these. That's why family is important, or other people who knew that person. But I think that's such a valuable part of basically growing up, no matter what your age is. I mean, I still think I'm growing up, like I'm not a grown up. Um, you know,
Someday.
someday, exactly, someday. But I think stories, and that's what I like, because I think that that's what, when you were describing that, of like the way they used to teach without books, that's really what it was. It was storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the neat things about it was when I first started getting into business and then into purchasing real estate and that sort of thing, I was so blessed. I had two folksy country lawyers who, the first one did maybe my first two or three deals. And because of how the market was and everything, and I was doing things that weren't necessarily um, they call it being less than arm's length, which means that you're doing a business transaction with someone who's become a friend, and either they're helping out in some way or you're helping out in some way. And at the closing table, my attorney was always great for taking what the pieces were of the agreement, that we were just about ready to sign, and then telling a story as if it were two other parties that were involved in it altogether. In one version of the story, it worked out just fine. Everybody was happy. They all got presents and ate pizza. Okay. And in the other story, it didn't work out well at all. And they wound up suing each other. So what he would do is he would make it kind of a little bit comedic, have had always had a little dose of of smiles in it. Uh, and then he would tell the story, and then he would ask me, do you have any questions about how those two different scenarios worked out? And he did it, in full hearing of the other parties in the transaction. Or sometimes they were in a different room before we were just getting ready to sign all the documentation. But I was fortunate because that attorney that covered my first two or three uh, residential purchases of income properties, and then the next man who took over also handled all of my lawyering for my corporations and my small business, as well as all of the other real estate that we did over the next 10 or 15 years. But they were educating at the closing table. They were essentially saying, here's the agreement that you think you're making. And sometimes not everyone at the closing table sees the situation the same way. So let's make sure that we tell you stories about how other people could be viewing what you're about to be signing. And he almost always said, because once you sign it, it costs money to get it unsigned. He said, whether it's a marriage certificate, or it's a partnership agreement with a friend in your business, or it's holding paper for somebody and giving them a loan so that they can buy a property from you, that sort of thing. Always loved stories, always did.
And I think throughout history, I mean, stories are amazing. I mean, if you look at what all the, epic tales from all the different traditions and religions, it was all based on stories being trying to relay a particular value or thought or a way of being. It was always about it was they were always had some sort of, I want to say, higher kind of intent than the actual story itself.
Right.
I think that when you're hearing stories as a kid or even as a young adult or even when you're older, you don't necessarily grab the nuance and the sort of like the deepness or the richness of that story necessarily until afterwards. And sometimes you go back and you reflect on it and you're like, and then you kind of interpret it for what it gives you meaning to you.
Yes.
Like, like just even the funny stories of like, you know, just like somebody doing something daring, and just this idea of fun, or it's just so different. And so I think that there's that comes from it afterwards. So the story has the ability to live on
Yes.
beyond, in good and bad. I mean, we have negative stories we tell ourselves, or stories that we live in, which we should have, which serve their purpose, and we should have, given up a long time ago. And then we have stories that I have those stories, where I'm like, okay, no, that's an old story. That's an old story, put it
Yeah,
down already.
you should get
Exactly,
frequent flyer mileage for some of those stories, right?
exactly, exactly. That's right.
Well, the thing I always like coming back to was in the in certain books of the New Testament, especially the Gospels and the Psalms. Christ was he was a rabbi. He was a teacher,
Mhm,
and his whole all of the parables and all of the stories that he told were so that people could place themselves into a particular way of thinking that didn't require telling them how to think.
mhm.
And it's an effective way for traditions to be passed on. And as you said, and I stop, and the more that I look into, say, for instance, the Bible, there is no the Bible. Just as there is no the Quran, there is no any of our holy books that started out their existence, especially the ones where the books are referencing things that happened 5,000 years ago, you know, or whatever the time was. Most of those were oral traditions for a very, very long time until they got written down, um, less than probably 2,000 years ago. All of the stories that were originally written in Greek and then in Aramaic. But we also find out that the great keepers of the early traditions were the Ethiopians, to the tune of they may have 88 books, as opposed to the 60 some that we have in a modern Christian Bible. So, what it really all comes down to is which stories fit which narrative of what people thought the reader or those who were going to pick up the tradition and carry it on would need, and which ones got in the way. And the neat part of the Torah, the Quran, and the Old Testament, pretty much the same thing. I mean, there are nuances in terms of how they've been wordsmithed, and obviously being written in a Farsi dialect is a little bit different than being written in Hebrew or in King James English. But the neat part of all of it is that there's a shared um, you know there's a shared history that we have, and we could expand on that, and we could use that to break down the space between us if we really chose to.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think because yes, absolutely, because I think that if you look back, they were basically all talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
And also, I think what I love about a lot of those languages, whether it be, you know, well, I know probably a little bit more about Arabic and Hebrew than I do about Farsi, but is that the words that were chosen when they wrote it down were really important. Like, they chose language and wording that was really important and kind of was the embodiment of whatever they were trying to relay in the
Right.
message. The language was very important. And so words were very important. The words they chose were very important. They had multiple words they could have used, and they chose specific words because of it,
Yep.
because of what they were trying. And I think that that's to me beautiful because when you talk about communications, it's like the interpretation comes or the sort of like the owning of it or whatever is based on the meaning of what like the words actually meant,
Right.
in addition to the story itself or whatever the message was. And I think that then there's a deeper kind of ownership of it, like an owning of it for yourself, especially if you're willing to go deep enough to look at what that is, like to the word that was chosen versus like, let's say you go to the word love and all the different variations of love. And at one point in the Bible, they never used the word love in the Old Testament. Like that's not
Right.
used. They use the word serve, which we would have a kind of like, well, what do you mean serve? But it was
Yes.
like to serve man, to serve each other. Like it was just like, oh my gosh, that was love. That was the expression of love was to be able to like put someone else before yourself.
Right. Yeah. One of the biggest word substitutions that I enjoy hearing about, and theologians who take the time to go back and study the half a dozen different ways that the Bible was written in their native tongues between the Greeks, the Aramaics, the Ethiopians, the Romans, and then other uh, um, dialects into Europe, Germans and et cetera, Latvians, all the rest of that. And one of the most interesting thing is that like Southern Baptists talk about being God fearing. That's an important word. The word that got translated into English, being fear, was a word that actually meant, awestruck love. And that's a huge, huge difference and distinction. So depending on which version of the writings that you're looking at, um, people will have conversations that go on for an hour with a word that they're seeing that might not exist in everybody's Bible,
Hmm.
just as an example. And if that's the case, um, what's more important, the lessons in the Bible or the words in the Bible or the Quran or the Torah? Why do we spend so much time convincing people that there's one true religion as opposed to having people learn how to listen for the commonality in all religion?
Well, that's I think that's been the sort of like the little bit, I think the basis upon which I've always like from the time I was little, I to live. It was like basically it was that underlying set of values or the underlying, I don't like to use the word desires, but the underlying wants of what everybody really wanted and how everybody, and that goes beyond necessarily the language and the exact story. That goes beyond all that. Not that that isn't interesting. Like to me, I find it really intriguing to learn, the fact that like when I first heard it that there's no mention of the word love in the actual Old Testament, I was like, wow, I never realized that. Like that's pretty amazing that not one place, and then recognizing what they used in its stead. Like that's interesting to me. Um, but just on an intellectual sort of like inquisitive kind of way. Does it
Right.
influence how I lead my life necessarily?
Yes.
Well, in some ways it does, because then I look at it and realize and I say obligation because I really do, like my heartfelt obligation to be able to go out and serve other people. And that being a demonstration of value of human beings or all beings. But including the planet and, all the animals or whatever, but this whole idea of, like, I think that stuff is very interesting,
Yes.
but really it is not meant for me or should nor meant to be, in my opinion, as a way to distract us from the real reason, like the real root reason of what all these were all about.
Yeah. It's fascinating, as a matter of fact. when you're thinking in terms of Old Testament, for example, I love what you said. The the most common word. Are you familiar with ahava?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then chesed,
Uh-huh.
and then rakamim,
Mm-hmm.
dod, and raya, and all of these words, they provide specific verses where it's a completely different tense or use of the word, where love would not have conveyed the same sentiment from it.
Mm-hmm.
The word agape is a similar word. There is no other word but agape that means unconditional, unending, and undeserved love. It's a lot to to cram into one word. You don't have to do anything for it. You don't deserve it. You don't not deserve it. It just is endless coming from God. That's what love is, coming from God. It's agape.
And I agree. First of all, yeah, because I mean, you have all those words and they are meant, and that is one of the things that's happened through time is it's almost, and I call it because I was listening to somebody, and they were talking about this to a few people, and they were talking about the laziness of people when they speak, of basically not trying to search for the right word necessarily.
Yes.
And they kind of substitute in the word, whatever, another word. Um, because in a lot of languages besides English, and even in English, there are different words for different types of things. And we know that because you can say you're grateful, you can say you appreciate, you could
Yes.
say you're thankful, you know, um, you're privileged and like to have something. So there are multiple words you could choose, and each has its own sort of richness or feeling.
Yeah. The non-biblical sentence that comes to mind is the one where we've been told that the Eskimos have 50 different words for snow,
Right, exactly.
and they're each one highly technical and descriptive of a particular type of situation where there really isn't too much confusion or overlap between these words. I think with all of that, we started out being open, in our conversation when we first got on here, and somehow we made it all the way full circle to love, which is not really a bad place to end up, is it?
No, not at all. Not at all.
And so, how would you like to wrap up our conversation in terms of just a missive, or shall we call it a cookie, that we can give to our listeners and maybe to each other?
Mm. I guess it would be like, listen to the stories that you're hearing around you. Like, listen to the stories. Like, maybe listen to the stories your kids are telling you.
Yeah.
I love hearing kids tell stories. There's something, a way they describe something and their enthusiasm, or their, in both directions. Enthusiasm could be bad or could be good, like, but it's almost like the drama of it all.
Yeah.
And I think just listen. Yeah. And and in that listening, like, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, there is this sense of like, I think the word love comes in because I think when you listen, you're listening with what? You're listening with an open heart, and you're listening hopefully with an open mind. And so, yeah. So I guess that would be my little cookie for today.
A very nice cookie. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we've done it again. My wonderful friend and I have chatted for just about an hour or so, and I'm really hoping that you got at least 2 or 3 things out of our chat that you can take away and bring into your own life. And as Jan says, maybe be a better story listener. You know, put your story listening ears on and see what that opens up for you in your life. Thank you very much, Jan. I really appreciate you, and thanks for spending your wonderful time with me.
Well, thank you, Bill. And let's all continue on this great journey together.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. 3 things. First, call someone that you love, let them know that you do, and tell them how much your world works because they're in it. Number 2, go out and live your very, very best life, and then come back and tell us all about it. And number 3, have an amazing day, loving each other out there all day long, wherever you go. Bye for now.
Bye-bye, everybody.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.